When it comes to rookies, NFL rookies at least, everyone only tends to care about the players that actually got drafted. And even then, they only care about like the day 1 and 2 guys. So, rounds 1 to 3. However, sometimes teams find diamonds in the rough with undrafted free agents, or otherwise known as UDFAs. Some notable ones in NFL history include Kurt Warner, James Harrison, and then recent Hall of Fame inductee Antonio Gates. However, when it comes to undrafted free agents, you're not really looking for all-timers or Hall of Famers like those guys. You're just typically looking for someone who can contribute. That's a win by itself. Getting someone who can contribute, even just for a few plays or, on special teams, that's a win because this is a guy who got passed on by every team in the league multiple times for over 200 picks. And then he comes to your team and he contributes for, even if it's just for like 3 plays out of the whole year, that's a win because this is a guy that everyone else doubted. That being said, this is undrafted free agents who I think will either make the final 53 or stick around on the practice squad and be the first guy called up if there are injuries in that room. 2 things before starting. This isn't a comprehensive list. I just have, I believe, 10 names on here. I could have added 20 more, but, I don't want to be here all day. I might make another video if this does well. And it's not a ranking neither. Just because one guy's before or after another doesn't mean I think they're better or worse. There's really no order to this at all. I was kind of just looking through names and just adding them as I went along. So that's it. And with that, we'll get into these undrafted free agents who I think is worth keeping an eye out for. First up is Xavier Restrepo, who Tennessee picked up. He's my personal favorite UDFA signing in this cycle, which I know is ironic to say immediately after saying this isn't a ranking to call the first guy my favorite, but who cares. He had a really good year with the Hurricanes last year, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. He was named an All-American, but he had a very lackluster pro day. Ran a really slow 40, I think it was 1 percentile. And it turned him from a late day 2, early day 3 guy to completely falling out of the draft. Still, as a UDFA, he could break into this wide receivers room. You got Calvin Ridley, you got Tyler Lockett, both good wide receivers. Tyler Lockett's a bit on the older side, but he's still reliable, and Calvin Ridley's a good wide receiver. Maybe not a great wide receiver 1, but still a good wide receiver. Traylon Burks, who disappointing for a first-round pick. And then 2 rookies who they already drafted, Alec Manor out of Stanford in the 2nd, and then Chimere Dike in, I want to say, the 6th. And then you have the veteran Van Jefferson, who had a good couple starting seasons with, I want to say, the Rams. And then for the last few years, he's been kind of going from team to team as a veteran depth guy. And I think he was on the Steelers last year, didn't play much. So the fact that they drafted 2 wide receivers kind of puts Restrepo at a different disadvantage because, they might not want to keep 3 rookies in one room. At the same time, though, it is a young team, so they might end up keeping him. And he has that college connection with number 1 overall pick Cam Ward, who, of course, they both went to Miami together. And I think Restrepo was the number 1 target. So, maybe that plays a hand in him making the team or even just being the first guy called up if there's an injury or someone's not performing to their level that they expect him to. He could be pulled off of the practice squad and come in as wide receiver 6. Next up is Howard Cross III, who Cincinnati picked up. I have to bring up my team, the Bengals, which I'm saying like it's some iconic thing about me, but this is literally my first video, so it can't be that iconic. Either way, though, the Bengals did sign 2 interesting UDFAs. You have, of course, Howard Cross III, who I ended up picking, and then also Seth McLaughlin, who I might talk about more if I make another video, because he's also very interesting, but we'll stick with Cross for now. He doesn't exactly provide the juice that the interior pass rush needs, but, he's a big body. He has the ability to overwork opposing offensive linemen. And if they keep 5 players on the interior D-line, he'll make it. But most likely they'll keep 4 and rotate edges inside on passing downs. So he's not going to beat out TJ Slayton or BJ Hill because they've already invested a lot of money in those 2. And then you have Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson, who coming off their rookie years. Chris Jenkins was drafted in the 2nd, McKinley Jackson drafted in the 3rd. So that's also a big investment to make to only have him be beat out by UDFA. So chances are Cross won't make the initial 53, but I think he'll be the first guy called up if there's injury because Jay Tufele left, Zach Carter left, so he's really the first guy on that practice squad that'll be called up if the injury bug bites that room. Sticking in the AFC North, we have safety Sebastian Castro, who the Steelers picked up. He was projected to go in the draft, but he tested very poorly and his measurables weren't that great. He's 50 percentile or less in everything except hand size, and even then hand size is something that's more looked at when it comes to the QB position. Most of the time in the other positions, people tend to look at like arm length. But despite his testing, despite his poor measurables, he has a college production. It's very solid college production, especially in his last 2 years at Iowa. He recorded 120 tackles, 4 interceptions, 9 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles. So the production is there. It's just the question of if it will translate with the poor testing and poor measurables. I think we'll get the opportunity, though, in Pittsburgh. The safety room isn't a very overcrowded room. Minka Fitzpatrick's the only standout. The other three ahead of him right now listed on the depth chart, there's movement that could happen there between training camp and preseason. So he could break his way into it, especially if they decide to keep 5 on the roster, which we'll see if they do. I think most teams keep 4, but if they keep 5, I think he'll make this team. Next up is the most interesting prospect on this list, Willie Lampkin, offensive lineman out of UNC. The reason he's interesting is because he's only 5'11", 290 pounds, which is very small for an NFL offensive lineman. However, the Rams still picked him up as a UDFA. He's very plug and play. He has experience at right guard and left guard as well as center. So theoretically, this is a guy who can come in and play one of 3 positions at any given time. And despite his size, he's incredibly strong, which means, there's a size doesn't matter joke in there somewhere that someone in the comments might make. So, keep an eye out for that. Still, though, he's very small, which is why he fell out of the draft. He was even saying that coaches were suggesting he transition to fullback. So that could be interesting because, a lot of people consider fullback to be a dime position. But again, I can't imagine this guy will make the final 53. It's just more interesting to look at because there are a couple ways the Rams could go with him. If they want to keep him as offensive lineman, if they want to, maybe have him focus on one position offensive lineman, or if they agree with the coaches that saying he transitioned to fullback, maybe they want to try to start that transition. It's just interesting to keep an eye out for Willie Lampkin just to see what could happen here. Staying in the NFC West, you have Corey Kiner, running back who the 49ers signed. If there's any position you can find a gem undrafted free agent at, it's running back. You got Priest Holmes, LeGarrette Blount, Fred Jackson, just to name a few. Kiner came from Cincinnati, and he had a really good last 2 years there. He ran for 2,200 yards on 5.6 yards per attempt, which is incredible efficiency. I'm pretty sure the average in the NFL is around 4.1, 4.2. So 5.6 yards per attempt, every 2 runs he's getting a first down. The only real blotch in his production is his low touchdown count. He has 16 across 4 years, and it's not even like he wasn't starting his first 2 years, so it looks bad. Last 2 years where he was starting, he only racked up 9 touchdowns, so that's a little bit of a downer, but nothing I think would turn people away too much. He could potentially make the roster as a running back 3 if he beats out 5th round pick Jordan James Oregon, but I think he has a better chance of making it as a running back 4 than he does sticking on the practice squad. Next up is edge rusher Jared Ivey out of Ole Miss, who Seattle picked up, which means it's now the 3rd straight team I'm talking about out of the NFC West. I guess that whole division did good with this UDFA class. Most outlets I looked at for Jared Ivey, though, had him going early day 3, rounds 4 and 5, but yet again, poor athletic testing caused him to fall out of the draft. This video is proof of just how valuable athletic testing is to NFL scouts. His 40 time and his bench press were underwhelming, but while his testing was bad, he still has really good measurables as an NFL defensive end, 6'6", 270 pounds, 81-inch wingspan, and on top of that, he has solid college production. 12.5 sacks over his last 2 seasons, 23 total tackles for loss, and he's battle tested. He's doing this in what is considered the best conference in college football, the SEC. So all that considered, I feel like he has a good chance to make this team, even with the poor athletic testing. Moving on, we have Clay Webb, offensive lineman who the Broncos picked up. He's probably the most surprising player to fall out of the draft on this list. He had a really great combine. He showed off a lot of athleticism. A lot of people really liked him, and they consider him an absolute steal as a UDFA. And he has a college production, but he did play at Jacksonville State, which is a smaller school. It's just a group of 5. And, so when you look at the production, you see a lot of people, they say, oh, well, would he do the same thing at Ohio State? Would he do the same thing at Alabama? And I'm not saying that's fair. I'm not saying that's justified. I'm just saying that's how people look at it when it comes to a group of 5 players. So maybe him playing at a smaller school like Jacksonville State caused him to fall. There was also the whole, making a guy drink semen laced Gatorade. So I'm sure that probably played a hand in it, but, I can't say for certain. Heading on over to the Carolinas, the Panthers ended up picking up wide receiver Kobe Hudson, who had a very solid collegiate career once he got to the Knights in Central Florida, but never really like a spectacular standout year. Still, he's another addition to a very sneakily interesting wide receiver room that the Panthers have. Of course, you have the 3 starters, McMillan, Leggett, and Thielen, but in terms of Kobe Hudson and his chances to make it, we got to look at the backups, where you have Jalen Coker, who was a UDFA last year and ended up having a very solid year with the Panthers. coming from, I think, Holy Cross. So, it was really on no one's radar. And Panthers ended up picking him up, and he had some good moments with them. But it's also very interesting because he'll be fighting with fellow UDFA, Jimmy Horn Jr., for that last spot, most likely. Maybe something changes. Maybe they sign another veteran in this offseason, but chances are they'll probably be between Kobe Hudson and Jimmy Horn Jr. for that last wide receiver spot. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye out for. Heading back to the AFC North, we have linebacker Jay Higgins, who the Ravens picked up. As is the story with almost all the UDFAs on this list. Originally projected to be drafted in day 3 range, tested poorly, no one picked him up. It's the same story. But Ravens had an incredible draft class this year. Mike Green, first round pick. They got Malachi Starks, Anais Peebles. They had a really good draft this year, and now they're just adding to it by picking Higgins up as a UDFA. They had a couple of interesting UDFAs, but Jay Higgins was really the one that stuck out to me. He had a really good year with Iowa last year. He was named an All-American. Finished with 124 tackles, 4 interceptions. The only thing is, though, the Ravens are already pretty stacked at linebacker. But I think Higgins could potentially make it as a special teams guy. A lot of people say he has a very good motor, so he's going to be working hard for it. He could also just be a really good depth guy. We'll see. Most likely, though, again, he'll probably stick around on the practice squad and be someone that gets called up at the first sight of injury. Either way, though, the production is there. The question is, same thing as Sebastian Castro, will it translate with that lack of athleticism and testing? Finally, to wrap this video up, we have offensive lineman Logan Brown, who the Vikings picked up. Really wouldn't be a video about UDFAs without mentioning the Vikings. They always seem to snatch up some of the most highly touted ones. Brown is probably the best pickup in their UDFA class this year. They had a couple of more interesting ones, Bryson Nesbitt, Max Brosmer, but I think Brown is probably the one, not only their best pickup in terms of as a prospect, but best pickup in terms of chances to make the team. He's athletic, he has incredible measurables, 90th percentile or higher in wingspan, shell time, and vertical, and he's versatile. He can play tackle or guard. I think he'll end up being a key depth piece this year in his rookie year, and potentially he'll end up starting over the next few years, but to start out, I think he'll be a key depth piece, which is still really good for a UDFA in their first year. Okay, before I actually wrap this video up, there were a few honorable mentions I wanted to name. Mostly players that are interesting for the narrative rather than them as a prospect. You got, first off, Chargers DJ Ugalele. Of course, I feel like everyone knows his name. He struggled a lot last season, essentially became a meme in the college football world. So it'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back from that. I mean, obviously he won't be taking Justin Herbert's spot, but maybe he'll become a career backup, or hey, maybe he'll get a chance to start and prove people wrong. In a similar vein, you have Donovan Edwards, who was highly touted for a little bit there in his college career, but then last year he got really overshadowed by his teammate Khalil Mullins, who ended up getting drafted in the 6th by the Titans. And then heading back to the Chargers, you have Marlowe Wax. Admittedly, I don't know much about him. He's a linebacker, but the reason I put him on here is because he was really good in my College Football 25 Syracuse dynasty, so I'm rooting for him. And that's it. Those are just some of the UDFAs I think you should keep an eye out for. There are many others that I didn't really get to cover in this video because I want to keep things fairly short. If people like this, I might make another part because there really is a lot of interesting undrafted free agents in this class. I mean, offensive line alone, I had 3 in this video, and there's still like 5 more I could name. So, if you like this, feel free to let me know.